Hello and welcome to MovieBoozer.com Pubcast. This is episode 108, and I'm your host, Ken Ekman, rejoining you after a brief time away in which I was actually moving into a new location. So, joining me today is Bill Leon.
Hello.
And we'll be joined a little later by Hawk Ripjaw once he gets here. And did someone just rappel down the wall in your house or something?
No, that was a reclining armchair. My microphone is actually right behind it.
Okay. I was going to say, it almost sounds like the kind of sound you hear in military movies when you see the special forces going, rappelling down the side of a wall. And anyway, I've seen plenty of Delta Force movies, Chuck Norris kind of stuff, so that sound effect is ingrained in my mind. That is as may be. Today we have a beer to talk about. The beer I have for you today is Sidekick Extra Pale Ale, once again by Two Brothers Brewing Company, which of course, as anyone who is a regular viewer of this show knows, Two Brothers is the beer that I tend to buy most often. It says here on the can, a sidekick is always there for you. The can says, let me take it out here, buddy, pal, mate, brother, or sister from another mother, compadre, sidekick. All of these are ways to describe someone or something that is always at your side. Sidekick Extra Pale Ale is one of those things. This golden-colored ale is loaded with juicy citrus and passion fruit hop aroma, yet balanced with malt and hop character, a true companion.
Huh. Okay.
All right.
Yeah, if you broke the English down on that just slightly, it would sound like the Iron Sheik.
Perhaps. All right. And as usual, I'm drinking using ThinkGeek.com's wonderful innovation, the Das Kannenstein.
Free plugs.
Free
plugs.
Yep. Well, it's buzz marketing, and I don't get any money from Two Brothers. I don't get any money from ThinkGeek, but I do enjoy the products that both produce, so may as well give them a free plug. Anyway, about to try the beer. Oh, I forgot I was drinking extra pale ale, and that got me. Sometimes the bitterness, if you're not prepared for it. So let's go with the second sip for the judgment. Okay, yeah. Like a pale ale, that definitely has the hoppy bitterness to it. I can certainly tell there's certainly a citrusy kind of after note to it. It's not one of their better pale ales, though, I would say. Granted, Two Brothers usually bottle stuff. They only can a few things, and what they can is usually kind of their second-tier beers. But that said, I will drink it. Not the most stunning of reviews, but there we go. So, we have a few topics to discuss today. The new movies are something we'll get to a little bit later. Chappie and Unfinished Business. Neither Bill nor I saw them, and there's a reason for this. And Bill, I know we were just prior to the recording talking about this. It's kind of interesting how this year, January is usually the... Well, of course, fuck you, it's January is the phrase that Red Letter Media uses. But everyone knows January is the dumping ground for film. It's odd in that January this year wasn't too bad. I mean, the new releases weren't particularly enthralling, but there were plenty of releases that were delayed from the Oscars. Basically, all but one weekend of January had at least a decent movie coming out into wide release. February also was not terrible, and that's something that is kind of baffling. You would think normally, February tends to be kind of just starting to pick up slack. But I mean, there weren't a lot of great movies, but there were some entertaining fucking movies. I can't tell you a single person who didn't go in to see If you walked into the theater and you watched Jupiter Ascending, you had a good time, regardless of whether you thought it was a good movie. Although I will say, if you thought it was a good movie, you are wrong. March, though, is kind of strange this year. It's pretty terrible. The first weekend of March, we get Chappie, Unfinished Business, and the second best exotic Marigold Hotel. The second week in March, coming up next weekend, we get the Cinderella remake from Disney and Run All Night, the latest Neeson-sploitation thriller. The next weekend, we get the Divergent series, Insurgent, which nobody gives a shit about. I was actually surprised they made a sequel because it didn't occur to me that the first movie made all that much. It must have.
It must have, yeah, because I think really, and I think I brought this up before, like when you adapt a book or something, anything outside of film that has its own built-in audience, you're kind of guaranteed that dollar.
Right. The other movies being released that weekend, Do You Believe, from the makers of God's Not Dead. Well, that's going to be fucking wonderful.
Oh, how about you want to bet nobody's going to want to review it, and you're going to have to, because I guarantee you it's not going to play near me.
It says wide release on Box Office Mojo, but that can change.
Yeah.
That said, it being by the makers of God Is Not Dead, fuck. The Gunman is another movie that's ostensibly slated for a wide release. Now, this movie intrigues me to an extent because it is produced by Sean Penn, starring Sean Penn, and also Javier Bardem, Idris Elba, and Ray Winstone.
That's not a bad supporting cast right there.
That's a wonderful cast. I mean, regardless of what you think of Sean Penn's politics, which I tend to think he's a bit of an asshole, but I agree with him in a lot of ways. Except for those comments he made at the Oscars. That was a little fucked up. But Javier Bardem, Idris Elba, and Ray Winstone, even if this movie isn't particularly great, at least there'll be some decent performances. So we'll mark that as one. So far, that's one movie in March that sounds intriguing. Next, in the final week of March, is Get Hard.
Well, wait, before we talk about Get Hard, I have to comment on something that I think is kind of funny. Do you remember, like, growing up in the 90s, like, entertainment news, whenever they would refer to Sean Penn, they'd be like, Hollywood bad boy Sean Penn.
Yes.
You remember that? Yeah, now
Oh, absolutely. Now it's just Hollywood's angry old man.
Yeah.
Who makes racist comments about a Mexican actor as a Mexican director right as he wins an Oscar. I mean,
yeah, I just thought that'd be a fun little throwback.
To be fair, I don't think he was intending to be racist. I think he was intending to make a joke about the fact that 2 years in a row a Mexican filmmaker won Best Director. Cool, that's fine. I appreciate. But his joke failed, and it was the kind of joke that if it fails, it comes off racist. Bad timing.
Right.
You are not a comedian, Sean Penn. You can't get away with that. Get Hard.
I get the feeling I'm more optimistic about this than you are.
Here's the thing. The trailers of movies like this are not going to be what wins me over. I'm not going to have a decision on this movie until I see, the finished product. Right, the finished product. And Kevin Hart has not impressed me very much. Will Ferrell, his movies are hit and miss. The next movie coming out that weekend is the first major animated film of the year, Home.
Ugh, yeah.
Which anyone who saw that short film that accompanied, I think it was it Despicable Me 2 or Peabody and Sherman. That's right.
Yeah. Which, oh my God, yeah, like apparently that totally flopped. I think it's kind of sort of getting some attention on Netflix right now, but like that's kind of a forgotten little film from last year.
You know what? I enjoyed Peabody and Sherman for what it was.
I liked it.
But then again, the movie really is. There's been a notorious difficulty in adapting those Jay Ward animated films, and for good reason. You can't exactly make something cinematic over something that was barely a cartoon to begin with. For what it's worth, I love Rocky and Bullwinkle. I love the original Peabody and Sherman cartoons. I love Fractured Fairy Tales, George of the Jungle, Dudley Do-Right and the Mounties. I'm missing some, but these are all fantastic cartoons. Not because the animation's good, because it's not, but because the writing is just sharp, witty quips, and just really, I mean, a lot smarter than it's written for. I mean, it's supposed to be a kid's cartoon, but it's I mean, it's the kind of thing where when you watch it as a kid, you'll laugh at the cartoonish elements, but when you're an adult, you'll be like, oh, that was a reference that I caught. And, well, to put this in perspective, there is a plot cycle within Rocky and Bullwinkle that revolves around them trying to find a missing ruby yacht of Omar Khayyam, which pretty much fucking no one, even today, knows what the ruby yacht is.
I don't, and I have those episodes on VHS.
Yeah, well, the ruby yacht of Omar Khayyam, which I admit I've never read myself. I just happen to know it from history books. It's actually a book of Persian poetry that dates back to, Jesus, like the 10th century or something like that. It's really old stuff, and it's apparently highly recognized poetry. And Omar Khayyam was sort of a Renaissance man of his. I mean, I guess before the Renaissance was a thing, he did a lot of things. Much like a lot of artists at the time, he was a scientist as well. So there's some fascination behind that. But what kind of a reference? I mean, that's Monty Python levels of just obscure referencing.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, so Jay Ward cartoons are brilliant, and so first of all, repeating that level of writing years later with a completely different set of writers, that's difficult. And two, the fact is the animation was kind of second tier to begin with. These shows were made on a just dime store budget. In the early cartoons, Boris didn't even have his eyes colored in. Things like that. There's so many continuity errors. It was basically animated just to have something visual for you to follow. But if you listen to an episode of Rocky and Bullwinkle, for instance, just not even watching, if you just put on headphones and listen to it, the soundtrack on an iPod, it plays like a radio play.
Oh yeah, totally.
And you can totally follow it from that. So that is the crux of my point is, it's not a very visual-oriented series, and translating that to film is not easy. So that's all the films that are playing in March. March is looking pretty sad. Other than the possibility of The Gunman, I'm keeping my eyes open for that, and the fact that Zombievers comes out, and we'll see how that goes. So far, it's not listed as a wide release, but it is coming to video on demand, so I guess can sort of argue that away. So to pad out the time before Hawk Ripjaw joins us, we have kind of a new segment on Movie Boozer that I'd like to kind of throw in for these slow weeks. And that segment is basically, I don't have a name for it yet, maybe people can suggest a name, is basically actor reviews, where every person who's on this Pubcast will choose a movie from an actor that we all agree on mutually, and we will choose our favorite performance or a favorite performance of an actor. And this week we have chosen Gary Busey. Now, Bill, I've been talking for a good long time, so I'm going to let you start. Lead us off. What is your favorite Gary Busey performance, or one that you chose to talk about today?
Well, I'll get it. I think really though, like with Gary Busey, like he's such a presence and kind of this Hollywood punchline at this point. I just want to kind of go into like my personal history with him.
Sure.
Which is okay. So back in the early 2000s, Comedy Central had this like late night block. They would show Insomniac with Dave Attell, TV Funhouse, and they had this reality show called I'm with Busey.
Brilliant show.
Yeah, and I'm with Busey was the writer-comedian Adam De La Peña, who went on to the G4 animated series Code Monkeys. He just goes and hangs out with Gary Busey at his house and stuff and tries to learn his philosophies on life, and hijinks ensue.
basically every episode.
And in every episode of that series, what was fascinating about it is you weren't really easily able to detect a separation between what was staged and what was reality.
Oh yeah.
Usually with these cheesy reality shows, you can tell it's all staged, but with Gary, I think he's one of the few characters out there who truly, he's such an eccentric. You really wonder how much of what happened on that show was just him saying, "Let's do this," because I'm Gary Busey and this is what I do.
I have watched the majority of a season of The Apprentice just because Gary Busey was on, and it was actually him and Meatloaf and Sugar Ray and Lil Jon. Like it was an insane collection of people, but it was really fun to watch. But anyway, then years later, before Tim and Eric were known as Tim and Eric, they had an animated series called Tom Goes to the Mayor, and they had Gary Busey on as a guest star. And you can't get this from the episode, but in the commentary on the DVD, Tim and Eric talk about how like Gary had a breakdown and started. He made Tim leave the room, and like when Tim left the room, Eric was talking to him, and Gary Busey told him that Tim was the cancer on the fruit of creativity, and like it's a hilarious commentary. So that's just sort of where I caught wind of his wild personality and
so really your experience with Gary Busey was more on television than on film originally.
Yeah, actually, in between the two, in high school, I took a class on popular music, and I watched the Buddy Holly story in that class.
Oh yeah, wonderful film.
Yeah, actually, I haven't seen it like since then, but I remember almost every scene in it. I remember Busey's performance.
It holds up real well.
I'll say this about that movie, which is really, really strange. The musical performances in the film are pretty good. The soundtrack for the movie is pretty lackluster.
Well, Gary Busey actually performed all of his own Buddy Holly songs, and I think he also
does a good job.
Instruments on it.
I think he plays guitar, and he did a good job. He's not the problem. They might even be different takes.
I would assume the big problem would probably be the production value of the music itself. Probably, the film was not done on a very large budget, and so the music is certainly it has that that weird '80s kind of sound to it. I would say.
Actually, really quick, I want to know who he lost the Oscar to that year. Richard Dreyfuss.
He was amongst some very strong competition for the Buddy Holly story.
I'll read off the nominees here.
That was 78 too. It felt like an 80s movie, but yeah.
Okay. No, okay, I'm looking at the wrong award show. He did not lose to Dreyfuss. Looking at the year before.
Yeah.
So,
78 actor in a leading role. I mean, that puts him amongst some stiff competition. The 70s was a strong time frame for that.
The nominees were Warren Beatty for Heaven Can Wait, John Voight for Coming Home, Robert De Niro for The Deer Hunter, Laurence Olivier from The Boys from Brazil, and Gary Busey for The Buddy Holly story.
Shit.
Yeah, and John Voight took it home.
Yeah, actually, Gary Busey, come to think of it, I did listen to a interview he had recently with, of all people, Gilbert Gottfried, and Gilbert Gottfried's Amazing Colossal Podcast, which is a great podcast if you like listening to old Hollywood stuff. If you can get past his voice. Some people are driven nuts by it, which is understandable. But Busey explained that John Voight actually told him, I guess, prior to the awards being given, he said, the one thing, regardless win or lose, there's nobody here who could have done Buddy Holly like you did, Gary. Which is a really humble thing to say to someone.
Yeah, that's probably true too.
And I have to say, Busey has always been a multi-talented performer. He plays a multitude of different roles. More recently, I would say he's been sidelined as playing just crazy guy when you need one.
Yeah. Well, at the same time, I don't know, and I brought this up
when you posed the topic, which is that he's been trapped in straight to DVD land for a really long time, and
Sure.
I feel like if he tried harder, he could get better roles. I'm not 100% sure that this is like. I feel like this is partially by choice.
Well, to an extent, I think it's a matter of your motivation, and if right now his primary motivation is living a comfortable life and being with his family and friends and stuff, then maybe he's doing that just to maintain, just for a paycheck, and that's understandable. I mean, it would be nice to see him certainly be in Oscar quality movies all the time. But, I mean, the fact is, I would say, honestly, I would rather see Ginger Dead Man than the next Al Pacino movie that's coming out.
Right, absolutely.
And I think as long as we're talking about actors who are in a slump.
Well, also, another thing about Gary Busey is that he was in a motorcycle accident in 1988 and endured severe head trauma. And ever since then, I think he's worked better in schlock.
Well, he has said that it completely changed his mindset, and it does show. Ever since he was in that accident, his personality has certainly shifted. His film choices have been less eccentric, have been more eccentric, I would argue, but less. I would say less based on what he can do and more who he is.
Yeah, that's absolutely true.
So, without further ado, though, I would like to since do you have a movie picked out, or shall I?
You can go first if you want. I mean, I do have one, but yeah, go ahead.
All right. Well, the movie I'd like to talk about is a movie that when I was very well, I wouldn't say very young. I was just about 11 years old when this came out. A mini series actually on TNT. That's just about 3.5 hours long, so essentially the length of a movie. It aired over 2 nights in 1997. The film was called Rough Riders. Actually, it was the last film of any kind directed by John Milius, which is interesting because
he's still alive, yeah.
Oh yeah, he's still alive. He's still working and mostly doing production work. I would say most famously, he produced the Rome miniseries for HBO in recent years. But Milius was known for being one of the few working conservative filmmakers in Hollywood. That said, I think he was a talented filmmaker, and regardless of his politics, I think he made some very interesting movies. And while Rough Riders is clearly limited by the TV nature of the production, it has one hell of a cast. This is a movie that relies on its cast to get it by, because it tells the story, in case you can't tell by the name, the historical story of President Theodore Roosevelt and the war, the Spanish-American War of the late 1890s. Roosevelt famously raised a company of mostly volunteers, and they basically invaded Cuba in order to take it back from the Spanish and ostensibly to free the Cubans. There's a lot more complex politics behind it, but the film sticks pretty close to the history, although it does differ in a few very significant ways. The most notable elements of the film, though, as I mentioned, are the cast. First of all, Tom Berenger plays Theodore Roosevelt, and you have never seen a better Teddy Roosevelt in film. I mean, he really sinks his teeth into the role. If you didn't know that it was supposed to be Tom Berenger, you would not even guess. Tom Berenger is one of those actors with a recognizable face. I mean, you know when he's in those movies. You would not recognize him in this. It's a wonderful performance. Sam Elliott has a good role in it. There's Brian Keith, George Hamilton, of all people, Arlie Ermey, Dale Dye, but most notable, as for our conversation, Gary Busey. Now, the character that Gary Busey plays, I think, fits in very closely with where we've been talking about Busey mostly playing crazy people. The character Busey plays is the actual historical figure, Joe Wheeler. Joseph Wheeler was a Confederate soldier in the Civil War, and during the Spanish-American War, when it started, he was actually a senator, and he was famously one of the few Confederate officers to serve in both the Union Army. To serve in the Union Army after the war was over. So he fought against us in the Civil War, and then within a span of about 20 years or so, he was like, you know what, fuck it, I'll fight for you guys now. And of course, like I said, he was a senator, so he was elected into office and such. But he was noteworthy for his eccentricities. Most noteworthy, as far as those eccentricities, during the Spanish-American War, while fighting the Spanish in Cuba, he referred to the Spaniards as Yankees. And so he was a bit of a crazy person, in case you haven't guessed. So Gary Busey was a wonderful casting choice. In the movie, his character is sort of a your typical kind of goofy, you're not quite sure, where his head is person, but halfway through the film, something wonderful happens that makes it even more watchable. In part 2, his character comes down with malaria. And for those of you who don't know what malaria is, it's a disease that is caused by mosquito bites that famously plays tricks with your mind. So the entire second half of the film, every time Gary Busey's on screen, he's going progressively more insane.
Malaria for our younger viewers who didn't play Oregon Trail growing up.
Right. Yes, you have died of dysentery. Dun, dun.
Yeah. Or melancholy.
Oh, melancholy, that's a good one. Yes, but with that said, Busey plays this role with aplomb. It's one of his most entertaining post-crash roles in that he really threw himself into it. Despite being a made-for-TV movie, I would say the performances get you through. It certainly does have some budgetary issues. I think the most notable thing is the fact that the movie's battle sequences take place in Cuba, and it's plainly obvious that they did not shoot the Cuba scenes in a tropical environment.
Mm-hmm.
They shot it just in the woods somewhere, probably in the hills of Los Angeles. And you'll see scenes where, like, in the foreground there's a bunch of bushes of like ferns and stuff to make it look tropical, but in the distance you'll see desert and like arid region kind of elements, and not exactly Cuba. But that said, considering the film's budget, it's a worthy film, and Busey's performance in it is a highlight. Another thing I want to mention about the film, as much as I like to talk about how much I enjoyed it, the film features the single worst bit of looping I've ever seen in a movie.
Really?
Oh, yes. It only happens in one scene. And then listening to the commentary track on the DVD, which, yes, I own this on DVD.
You've talked it up before, so I'm not surprised.
Yeah. I understand why. There's a scene in towards the end of the first segment, of the first hour-and-a-half long segment of the film, in which a woman, it's like a montage sequence, and a woman is singing a song. And the voice, like the lyrics, are completely out of sync. Like it doesn't even I don't think it's the same goddamn song being sung, like, at all, because you hear the music, you hear the lyrics, and you see her mouth moving, but you feel like you're watching a Godzilla movie or something.
Chosen one! I'm coming!
Yeah. I mean, it's serious. You get a total, oh my god, it's Godzilla, we must flee the city, kind of thing.
Oh, God.
Where the mouth is just so out of sync. It's ridiculous. And then on the commentary track, you find out that the voice singing was actually John Milius's wife.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can understand as a filmmaker, he's like, all right, so I want to put my wife in a cameo in the movie, and I couldn't actually get her on screen. you think you would have had her maybe try to lip sync a little closer. If you watch it, you will notice it right away. It's horrific. And Milius is a better filmmaker than that. I mean, if you've seen Conan the Barbarian, you should know. Red Dawn aside. So I'm done talking about that movie unless you have any questions for me.
Is this, you said Gary Sinise is in this, right?
No, Gary Busey is in it.
Yeah, I know Gary Busey. Okay,
here, let me read the cast list. Tom Berenger, Sam Elliott, Gary Busey, Brian Keith, Arlie Ermey, Dale Dye.
Is this the one where somebody played the same role twice, right?
No. Oh, you're thinking of a whole different miniseries.
Yeah, what's that?
Okay, Gary Sinise was in another TNT original. That came out around the same time as this, was a film called George Wallace, about the famous Southern politician, the racist politician. And George Wallace was a miniseries that's directed by John Frankenheimer, who a couple of years later, and just prior to his death, the final film he completed was a made-for-HBO movie called Path to War. And Path to War was about Lyndon Johnson. And there's a famous sequence in which Lyndon Johnson confronts George Wallace. And Gary Sinise reprises his role as George Wallace for that film.
Is this the director of Reindeer Games?
It is the director of Reindeer Games.
Okay.
But here's the thing. You can say all you want about John Frankenheimer's bad movies. Because, yes, he did.
I like Reindeer Games, but mainly because I have How Did This Get Made to go with it.
Oh, okay. Well, he certainly did have his share of bad movies. But that said, for every Reindeer Games, you have Path to War, which was a pretty good TV movie. You have Ronin. George Wallace is a pretty good movie, too. You had the Andersonville TV movie. He did a lot of good TV movies, and not
a lot of theatrical movies.
Well, Ronin is one of the best action movies of the 90s, I maintain.
Okay.
Robert De Niro, Jean Reno, probably one of De Niro's last great films, I think. But other movies he did, if you really want to break it down, back in the 60s, John Frankenheimer made The Manchurian Candidate, The Birdman of Alcatraz, 7 Days in May, The Train. The Iceman Cometh in the 70s. He did some wonderful, wonderful films. The Manchurian Candidate and 7 Days in May are two of the great thrillers of all time. So I can't credit it enough. But that said, he also did one of the most wonderfully bad movies that How Did This Get Made may not have done it yet, but you think Reindeer Games is fun? Have you ever seen The Island of Dr. Moreau?
The 90s one?
Yes, with
heard of, never seen
Marlon
it.
Brando and Val Kilmer.
Yeah, heard of it, never seen it.
Yeah, that movie is something special.
I seen the trailer for it and I was in shock. I was like, I cannot believe this exists. Like,
yeah, it's. I really can't fathom what anyone was thinking during that film. The filmmakers, the actors. Although I did hear Greg Proops comment on the movie recently on, oddly enough, his podcast, and he said that there was a conversation that took place in the background of the film between a couple of the actors, and Marlon Brando was overheard someone say, "Did you read the script? It's terrible." And Marlon Brando said, "Did your paycheck clear? Also, I didn't read the script. No." The movie also features cameos from people like Neil Young and who else was in this? There's a lot of weird ones. Ron Perlman's a small character in the movie. Frank Welker does some voice performances of some of the monster characters.
now that's weird, but okay. Wow.
It's
Frank Welker.
Well, Welker, I mean, if you need someone to voice someone over, of course, Welker's the person you want to go to.
Yeah, he's a vet.
Honestly, I think you would love The Island of Dr. Moreau. It's wonderful. But not to get too far off topic, what Gary Busey movie do you have to discuss?
I'd like to spotlight Hider in the House, which is a weird one to spotlight. Basically, like it's the Wikipedia here says 89, but I don't think anybody really got to see it until 91 because and I'll get into that, but like it's a B movie to be sure, and it has a weird fucking premise. So those are just two things that interest me off the bat. You got a triple threat. You got B movie, weird premise, and Gary Busey. I'm sold. But I'm reading the Wikipedia page here, which is very short. It says the studio that was making this movie had financial difficulties. This never got a theatrical release in the States, but it actually did get one overseas eventually.
Okay.
And it didn't come out on video until 91. But so like I was revisiting I'm with Busey and decided to like check out a bunch of trailers for his movies. And Hider in the House comes up, and the premise of Hider in the House is that Gary Busey is a guy who killed his parents as a child, and he's been in a mental institution since then. And the movie opens like as he's getting released. And I think even at some point they offer him like a halfway house he can live in, but he says like, no, I'm good. I'll find somewhere. And he's just walking through the suburbs and finds this house that's still being renovated, and breaks inside and he walls off a section of the attic so he can live inside of it, and makes a hidden door. So he lives behind this wall that he made in the attic.
Okay.
And then a family moves in, and he continues to live there.
So it's kind of like Beetlejuice, but if Beetlejuice wasn't actually dead.
If Beetlejuice was creepy and just a man living in your house, I guess.
Wow, that's fucked up.
And that's really saying something, yeah, because like Beetlejuice should be kind of creepy, but like he's a charismatic. It's Michael Keaton, and he's fun and goofy, and like you can't help but love him. But in this situation, your life might be in danger.
Yeah, no kidding.
Another thing to point out about this movie that is something that is just very weird. So like this family moves in, husband, wife, and 2 kids, and Gary Busey's character immediately takes a liking to the wife, played by Mimi Rogers. But I think the more interesting thing is that her husband is Michael McKean.
Interesting.
And
Mimi Rogers and Michael McKean. Huh.
Yeah, Mimi Rogers, especially in '89, not a bad-looking woman.
Oh no.
For some reason, Michael McKean's cheating on her, so she kicks him out of the house, and he's gone for a while. And then Gary Busey, basically, the only thing I can think to like relate this to is Big Mama's House.
Okay.
You know how in Big Mama's House, like Martin Lawrence's character is Big Mama, but then he starts showing up as himself to flirt with the girl?
Yeah.
Gary Busey starts doing that in this movie, where like he just pretends that he's this guy around the neighborhood, and he's like hanging out with her kids, and like her son is being bullied, and he saves the kid from being bullied.
Now this was made in 1980. Well, supposed to be released in '89. So he was in his crash in '88. So was the actual production of this film before or after the crash?
That's a good question. I'm gonna take a stab in the dark and say before, because there are differences, like in his facial appearances, like his eye kind of droops, and like he did look different afterwards.
Yeah.
But then again, I mean, even before the crash, he was weird, because like you could check out movies like Bulletproof, or even his performance in Lethal Weapon. Like he was a weird guy before the crash. So
Point Break, anyone?
Point Break is post-crash, but yes.
Oh, it is?
Yes. That was 90-something, right?
Oh, Jesus. You know what? That movie feels so 80s. It's just...
You're right.
It never ceases to amaze me that was made in the 90s. You're right. Damn.
Yeah, Point Break was post-crash, but so basically, like Hider in the House, I guess it's an interesting premise.
I like even the name is
Oh yeah, yeah. Also, the tagline in the trailer is "How can they keep him out when he's already inside?" Like that. How fucking cheesy! Like that is just so perfect. Like that. It cracks me up. This movie cracks me up.
Yeah.
But okay, so like basically he starts coming around and pretending to be like just some guy that lives in the neighborhood. But he's around too much to the point where the wife starts to see like, oh, maybe this isn't, the kind of guy I want hanging around with my kids. Because there's a scene where he's teaching the son how to defend himself. And he I swear to God, he tells the kid to like kick him in the jugular and like just gets real violent with it. He doesn't say kick him in the jugular, but he tells the kid to like get more violent than he needs to.
Right.
And so at that point, she like takes the kid inside and she's like, "I think you need to leave, Tom."
Well, yeah. For him, leaving is going upstairs, right?
Yeah, basically.
So how does he get in and out of the house without anyone noticing? Does he go through a window or?
Yeah, what do they call that shit? That like.
What window?
No, not a window. The thing on the side of the house, that like wooden thing that characters will climb up in movies. That shit that normal people don't usually have on the side of their houses.
A ladder?
It's not a ladder. No, it's
I'm
like
lost
actually
here.
part of the side of the house.
Grow up it.
Yeah, what is it called? It's like a fence.
That the vines grow on.
The fence that the vines grow on the side of the house. I don't know. I don't know what I'm talking about.
I'm lost on that one. But I mean,
He climbs up into the attic and climbs in a window usually.
I do know some chimneys that have like metal bars stuck in it, like at certain angles, so you can climb it up like a ladder. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, that kind of. It's like a zigzaggy piece of wood.
Okay, I probably would have to see it in order to understand, but that's all right.
I don't think I'm describing it as well as I could be, but so there's just like a lot of typical kind of thriller elements in this movie. You got this neighbor across the street who Mimi Rogers is very kind of thinks he's creepy, but actually the neighbor's innocent. Like the neighbor basically Mimi Rogers thinks everything that goes wrong with what Gary Busey's doing is the neighbor's doing. Like there's a part, for some reason he kills their dog and buries it in the backyard, and like at some point, like in the beginning of the third act, they find the dog buried in the backyard. There's a part where they get their house exterminated, and the exterminator goes up in the attic and finds him, so Gary Busey has to kill the exterminator. Just like little shit that is going to get him caught, basically. But for the longest time, the wife thinks it's the neighbor, doing all this weird shit, and like the neighbor comes over and hits on her. And there's a really hilarious scene where Gary Busey comes over to the house as his neighbor character, and the other neighbor is like hitting on her, and he's about to like slap her ass, and Gary Busey grabs his wrist. He's like, "Not today," or some shit. Cliche, like lots of cliches, but I mean that's what makes it fun. Like it's a really schlocky, and basically I think really from this point on you can kind of figure out where it's going. There's, you got the third act showdown where Michael McKean comes back and Gary Busey's, taking, like basically there's a part where he tries to confess his love for Mimi Rogers, and she's kind of starting to see that he's creepy and not all there, so she rejects him. And he just freaks out and grabs her and takes her into the attic, and then there's this big final showdown. Like it's really silly, but I had a blast watching it.
I'll have to check that out. Is that available on any streaming services or anything?
It's on YouTube in full. In fact, actually, I'll say this: it's only on VHS. There's a DVD release in the UK, but no US DVD release. So as far as I'm concerned, it's fair game.
Ah, okay.
We have technically no access.
Okay, well that's good to know. So while still waiting for Hawk Ripjaw to show up, I wanted to go ahead and cover a couple entertainment news bits of information just that have come out recently. First of all, I don't know if you know this, but Greg Allman of the Allman Brothers, you are familiar with.
Yeah, I know the band. I know who he is.
Well, were you aware that there was a biopic that was being made about him?
No.
Yes. Well,
I feel like they're getting. Not to cut you off, I do feel like they get carried away with some of these biopics.
Greg Allman has an interesting life story. I don't know.
As far as ones that I hear in development, I don't know. Like, and again, it'll be somebody that I like.
Mm-hmm.
Like Freddie Mercury or Keith Moon, and when I really think about it, I'm like, do I want to watch a movie of that?
Well, yeah, I mean, that is a question you have to ask. I mean, I did watch Sid and Nancy once. Wow, that's a movie I would have rather avoided.
I will say this: check out. There's a sketch from The State where it's Sid and Nancy on the Match Game or the Newlywed Game or something. It's a hilarious sketch. It's totally a takeoff on that movie.
So, back to the biopic, here's some interesting news about it. A little while ago, there was an issue in that there was a train accident that resulted in the death of a crewman. Mm-hmm. The director of this film, Randall Miller, as well as the executive producer, pled guilty to involuntary manslaughter.
Jesus.
Yeah, it sort of reminds me of the famous incident in the set of Twilight Zone, the movie, in which I forget his name. The actor died in a helicopter crash, and also 2 child actors also died. Horrible incident, but John Landis forever, like his soul was haunted by that and that incident, and there was a major trial and such involved. In this case, by admitting to voluntary manslaughter, Randall Miller was actually sentenced to 2 years in jail and 8 years on probation, which is intriguing. That's a pretty harsh sentence to give for something like that. But that said, I mean, basically what happened was there was a person who was on the first day of shooting the film was hit by a freight train. Mm-hmm. And I guess the crewman was fatally struck after the crew placed a hospital bed on the railway tracks while filming a dream sequence. And they apparently didn't consider the fact that there might have been trains that were coming through. Yeah, so setting up...
I was going to say, to lighten the mood a little bit, I just had an idea for a sketch, which I think would be funny. They should make a comedy sketch where it's like a biopic on like the smallest person in rock history, like one of the backup dancers in Thriller. Give that guy a biopic. We're giving them to everyone else.
Well, I just want to. I have one more thing to say. The director Randall Miller. Does his name ring a bell at all?
No. What did he do?
Not much. I looked at his directing list, and he's acted and directed in quite a few movies. The only one of which I have any knowledge of is House Guest, the Sinbad movie.
What did he do in that?
Directed.
Oh, what? Okay.
Yeah, he directed House Guest, which is...
I haven't seen that in years.
Yeah, it's okay. He directed it.
House Guest was a movie that I watched when like my dad first got on demand, and we had like Encore and HBO and all these channels. Like that's and that movie's perfect for that, honestly.
He also directed a good number of TV shows. He directed an episode of Parker Lewis Can't Lose, Salute Your Shorts, Northern Exposure. He directed an episode of Freaky Links. Do you remember that?
No.
Yeah, I don't. I remember the name, not much else. So yeah, it looks like Hawk Ripjaw is trying to join us, but he's having trouble. So
yeah, he's been having internet issues, but he'll make it. Hopefully, he'll get in here.
So, needless to say, it's sad that I mean, obviously, if you're filming a movie, you have to be responsible for your crew, and putting something on train tracks when you didn't, you know, when trains are still going, that's kind of problematic. Um, all right, so going through other information,
Well,
other entertain. What?
before we went on the air, we were talking about Neil Blomkamp and
Mhm.
Aliens. How do
Yes.
you feel about him not only directing a new Aliens movie, but the possibility of them ignoring 3 and Resurrection?
Oh, absolutely. I think they need to ignore 3 and Resurrection because those movies are pieces of garbage,
Hmm.
unredeemable pieces of
Hmm.
garbage. That said, they're not going to ignore them. The most recent thing they're saying is that the film is going to exist within the same continuity, though it will not be referencing those movies, which is, I think, a wonderful way of saying we don't know what the fuck we're doing.
Hmm.
And how do I feel about Neil Blomkamp directing it? Quite simply, I don't know. I mean, he could. If his film contains the same interesting ideas as, say, District 9,
Hmm.
it might work. But the problem is we're dealing with a filmmaker who has made 3 movies, one of which, District 9, is very good, another of which, Elysium, is, I would say, mediocre, and
Hmm.
then another one, Chappie, which I have not seen, but has not exactly been met with the most positive of criticism.
Hmm.
And that this would be a wonderful time for Hawk to join us. But
If you want to kill some time, I could talk about Gravity Falls.
okay, go ahead.
Hey, all right. So this past Monday, they dropped a new episode of Gravity Falls. If you don't know what Gravity Falls is, it's an animated series that's owned by Disney. Sometimes they air it on their Disney XD channel. It regularly airs on that, but every once in a while they'll drop a new episode on the Disney Channel.
Mhm.
But what the show is these 2 kids get sent off for the summer to stay with their great uncle in this small little pissant town in Oregon called Gravity Falls. But and the 2 kids are boy and girl twins named Dipper and Mabel. And the boy finds a journal marked number 3 on the cover, which tells of all these supernatural secrets and goings ons and like crazy stuff that occurs in Gravity Falls. And eventually, as the series goes on, the story gets bigger, and you learn like there's way more of a backstory to it, and it keeps building upon itself. I would, it is so well written for something that is basically a product made for children in a way. I mean, like this show specifically, kind of in the same vein as Adventure Time, has a much more adult following to it. But at the end of the day, it's a product for kids, and as far as that goes, it's one of the most well crafted, cared for, well written kids shows that I've ever seen. Period.
Mhm.
Without getting into too much spoilers, like this past episode they just aired, it wasn't longer than an average episode, but they crammed so much in there, like so much action, so much story, so many reveals. It felt so much longer than it really was. And the one downside, I think, is like this is sort of a series that takes its time
Mhm.
because it's a kid show. You do get filler episodes here and there, but the filler episodes aren't bad. Like that's the one thing I would say for people going in is like if you're going in expecting nothing but story, it's paced out very. They don't give you everything. Like it's sort of like
Sort of like, we seem to have dropped off. Well, we've got dead air. At least it sounds like it. Um, so Not sure what's causing that. That said, I have not seen Gravity Falls, although I am interested to see it, since Gravity Falls is something which has been certainly talked about with a great deal of admiration. I do have some interest in seeing it, and if it comes to a streaming service, maybe I will. I also recently watched the trailer for Daredevil, which intrigued me. But give me a moment. It seems like we have some technical difficulties. Bear with me. Apologies for the technical difficulties. It seems like we've been encountering a few of those. Chappie, which I have not seen, the reviews have been mediocre at best, unfortunately. And I know that they talked about the possibility of making a sequel, which that's not going to happen given the fact that the box office performance was so bad. I really wanted this to be good because I legitimately enjoyed District 9. And it's a little bit unfortunate that the reviews have been so mediocre. Some of the Rotten Tomatoes reviews of it, let me go ahead and give some blurbs just for fun. Some of the Rotten Tomatoes blurbs have been things such as, while the visual effects are spectacularly seamless, they're in the service of a movie which devolves from vaguely funny to just plain silly to numbingly gory. Another wonderful review blurb says, the execution of the Chappie character is idiotic. Blomkamp is trying to wring laughs out of a robot that spews pigeon gangster jargon and swaggers while clutching his groin. And someone else appears to be trying to join. Looks like Bill might be trying to join back. Seems like we're getting a lot of technical difficulties right now. Certainly did not see this coming. Let me go ahead and throw out a few more things. Gene Kaplan of Kaplan vs. Kaplan wrote of Chappie, Chappie is one of those movies that's forgettable before you even leave the theater. So that's interesting. I like the names of some of the characters in the film.
Oh, hold on. What happened?
You've been offline for like 5 minutes, and I've been blurbing random stuff into the camera, hoping.
Okay, then it was my connection. Sorry about that.
My connection, it didn't drop off. We are still having trouble with Hawk Ripjaw. He doesn't seem to be able to get through to the stream.
Where did I leave off?
You left off a while ago, so I don't even remember.
Okay. Well,
needless to say, you enjoy Gravity Falls quite a bit.
Gravity Falls is so good. Like it's everything I want out of a TV show. It's the humor's there, the writing is there, the story's there, the characters are there. They put Easter eggs in the background. There's hidden codes to decipher, and the amount of effort that they put into like every episode is just it's fucking admirable. I wish every TV show had this amount of commitment.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was just responding to Hawk on something. But yes, it seems like a fantastic show, and I'll certainly watch it at some point if it comes to a streaming service.
The first season, at least, is on one of the Netflixes, one of the foreign, I think UK.
Oh, okay. Well, I need to catch up. I missed the last couple episodes of Better Call Saul, and I know it's streaming on Netflix UK, so I'll be setting that up probably probably sometime in the next couple of days anyway. So maybe I will give that a look if it's still available there.
You should, yeah.
With that said, I'm sorry to cut things short as today has been, but really we were kind of counting on Hawk to be able to discuss Unfinished Business and Chappie since neither of us saw it. So I guess this will be an abbreviated episode, and we'll join you next week, ostensibly with Hawk Ripjaw joining us to discuss those movies, and maybe by then, maybe one of us will have seen Cinderella, maybe, kind of.
Ugh.
The reviews on Rotten Tomatoes have been relatively positive.
Let's talk about that. Have you seen the original 2D Disney Cinderella movie?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
It's a classic animated film. I mean, honestly, I have no interest in rewatching it. It's a great film for kids to watch. I'll say that much.
The painted backgrounds in that movie, I think, are its greatest strength.
Okay.
The stepmother, I like the stepmother. The stepmother's a good character. Whoever that actress was voicing her, like, all of that just came together. Like, she is one of the great Disney villainesses.
I would say that if there were any Cinderella movie for me to rewatch, I would say Jerry Lewis and Cinderfella. Which is an actual movie that exists and is actually quite funny.
You know, for years...
Also doesn't hold up very well, but...
For years I've heard good things about Enchanted, and I've never watched it, so maybe I'll take the plunge on that.
Yeah, you go ahead and do that. Tell me what you think of it, because I saw it and did not understand why anyone praised it at all.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay.
So yeah, I would be intrigued to see that. I may wind up seeing Cinderella if the reviews hold. Let me say this: I will vow to see Cinderella this weekend if the Rotten Tomatoes score stays above 80%. By
80?
Friday.
Whoa, 80. I mean, you know it's not going to do that.
It's at 88% right now, and
I promise you it's not going to stay above 80.
There are 43 reviews and counting. That's a lot.
I don't know if that's a realistic...
No, I will see it if it stays above 80. I'm not. If it's any lower, then fuck it.
I don't think it's going to stay above 80.
All right, well then I won't see it. And
well, I'm just making a prediction. I'm just making a prediction, and that's really only based on what do we have already? Maleficent, and there was another one. What's the other one they did? The live-action Disney reinterpretation. What'd they do? I'm trying to think of what it was. I got nothing. There was another one.
Cinderfella is the only other one I know of.
I'm not talking about Cinderella. I'm just talking about a live-action Disney adaptation. I thought they had done one outside of Maleficent.
Alice in Wonderland?
Alice in Wonderland, duh. Okay, and actually, we got more movie news to talk about. Disney has supposedly hired Tim Burton to do a live-action Dumbo. Which...
Yes, and that's...
Yeah, I know. I already know what you're gonna say.
Yeah, why is that news? That's like anti-news.
That's true. It's a good point. But
I mean, Tim Burton's been hired to make a movie that Tim Burton has been. I'm sorry, but he just made a movie that recovered some credibility in my mind.
I agree, and that's the thing is like hearing this. His next movie is some kind of like Lemony Snicket's type shit. It looks like. Again, it looks like. I don't know. It is an adaptation of some kind of tween gothic book. It looks like, which really gives me the wrong vibe of as far as like what I thought he was going to do after Big Eyes. Because as you know, I was a champion of Big Eyes. I to this day I like Big Eyes a lot. I feel like he could do so much better. Like. Fucking do better.
Yeah. Big Eyes was decent, but I mean, it's still not classic era Tim Burton by any stretch of the imagination.
No, but I saw the groundwork to get back to that. in Big Eyes, and now I just feel like all that potential's going down the fucking toilet.
Yeah.
But we'll see. He hasn't put anything out yet, so.
Yeah, I don't know. At this point, I think that the fact that he's doing Dumbo, honestly, that worries me. If you're going to do a live-action Dumbo movie, well, first of all, don't do a live-action Dumbo movie. Stop doing live-action movies of animated films that are already considered classics. I mean, what you're basically doing is saying, we think you're stupid and we want to take your money.
I see how that mentality could be there, but honestly, like, I feel like there's going to be a lot of studio restraint.
Mm-hmm.
You could make something really cool out of a live-action Dumbo. You would just have to get batshit crazy with it. Like you really could make something cool with that.
Right, right. Well, you know what we're going to do really quick here? We're going to do a technical test, and I'll amend the Movie Boozer webpage to add a second video. If we're able to do this, Hawk may be able to join. We're going to try going out of this and opening a new stream. If not, then we'll see you next week. But if so, then we'll see you in just a few minutes. All right. You stay classy.